Yes,
All
thank
right,
you.
cool. Look, I spent all this time looking for wonderful GIFs and looking for amazing screens of what you can see here. I was like, why isn't anyone understanding what I'm coming from? Look at all this work I did in getting these things prepared for you. Well, whatever. There you go. So this is what I just burned the last few minutes through. Anyways, these are the toys that I was talking about. I don't know if you guys had them, but there you go. I'm assuming you guys didn't see these, but these are the sort of attributes I was talking about. This is the decoder card. This is what got me sort of attached to being involved with data. So there you go. So data is everywhere. The problem is we don't want to use it, and we're really good at pattern matching. So that brings us now to where we were before, which is here, talking about Kendo UI. So apologies for that. I spent all that time looking for great animated GIFs. Wasted. Oh well. So from a visual perspective, humans are really, really good at spotting patterns in a visualization. And so when I look at these sort of visualizations, there's really a couple of classes of data visualization. There's the class of academic visualization, or the folks who get on TED Talks. The visualizations I'm looking at here aren't that sort of classification. I'm really not that. I'm kind of a dummy. I'm not really that smart to be speaking at TED or anything like that. I like to think of this as data by people like me for people like me. And so that brings us to Kendo UI. So Kendo UI is a framework for building out a whole bunch of things. It's a set of widgets that you can use in your web pages. There's over 70 widgets that you can use, and the ones that I'm going to focus on here are the ones that you can use for visualizations. So there's a number of ways in which you can visualize data. There's a number of really meaningful ways in which you can visualize that data. But the types of visualizations that I'm talking about here are the ones where you're trying to take or sort of disseminate what the data would look like over time, or cross-reference that with other types of data. So here's an example of a visualization project that we had worked on that took the stock history over 5 years for 3 major companies: Google, Amazon, and Apple. And you know, these are sort of the things that you can do with a framework like this. But of course, it obviously gets a little bit better than that. You guys all may remember an application called, or rather, a application scenario called Northwind Traders. If you've ever used Microsoft Access or SQL Server, this is something that you'll commonly see used in demos, etc. It's a pretty heavy schema. It's if you've used it before, you've probably seen this used in Microsoft events, etc. We have an application that we've built, a visualization of this, that actually takes that data and makes it look probably the best looking demo of Northwind that I've ever seen. So visualizations like this can actually really start to show you what's possible with a technology like Kendo UI. This can also apply to things like sorting algorithms. So this is a way of visualizing how you would do, for example, a bubble sort or other types of sorting algorithms inside a visualization. You can apply to other types of visualizations as well. This is a website called the HP Archive. The HP Archive is a site that crawls about 300,000 URLs, and it will break down how that each individual URL is comprised. So it's going to take a look at the address. It's also going to take a look at the content that it's going to pull down, and then give you interesting information about that content. The charts and graphs that are used on this site aren't great. They use Google Charts. There's nothing wrong with that, but I felt like there's better ways to display this data. And so one of the ways in which you can do that is through Kendo UI. In fact, let me go ahead and just jump back into my screen here, and let me see if I'm doing screen sharing appropriately. So I'll make sure that's definitely enabled. Great. So I'm just going to show you some of the live examples here. So this is the HP Archive, as I showed you before. What's really interesting about this is that if you take a look at this and you think, okay, well, what is this really showing me? Just as a side note, I do a lot of talks on web performance, and one of the sad things about an average web page today is that it's well over nearly 2 megs in size. So if you take your average vanilla web page and take a look at its content types and break it down by size, it's over 2 megs, which is quite disturbing if you think about it. But I didn't really like the way that these things look, so I decided to build something called web page obesity. And what this is a breakdown of the web pages on an average over the last 5 years. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got November 2010 all the way up to this month of this year. What you're seeing here is two axes of data. The first one is this sort of stacked graph that shows the breakdown of what's in an average web page today. So you've got about 145K of other, that could be any types of MIME types, about 83K of Flash. You've got ping images, which come in at a sort of beefy 337K. This big whopping orange part is JPEGs, so photos or imagery used for displaying on pages. On average, for an average web page, comes in at around 849 kilobytes, which is astounding. And if you take a look at the data over time, I mean, back in November 2010, it was a measly 300K. It wasn't really that much. But since then, we've almost, well over doubled in size in terms of that data. So these sorts of things actually really start to give you a sense of where we're going with the internet, which is obviously not a good place. Hopefully we can get something like the MDN here. That might help. It might increase download sizes. This other line that you see here is the the page speed index score that's generated by Google. So as you can see, there's it's not an entirely depressing story, right? We're seeing an increase of the page speed score over time. This is a stacked bar chart as part of CanDUI, so it's something that you can integrate with well. You can also break this down if you wish. You can enable and disable some of these if you want to just compare the image formats, for example, and see, you know, oh, the pings and the JPEGs and the GIFs. So that's something that's interesting, worth looking at. Another example, obviously, the stock history. There's aspects of visualization that come into this that are important to play out. I mean, animations are very, very important. You want to make sure that you give a sense of flow when looking at the data. And so one of the things that is involved in providing that is transitions. We do these transitions using CSS3. These charts and graphs, by the way, I should mention, are built using SVG or Canvas. We support both. And the reasons why you might do both is one is good for fidelity, the other is good for performance. The other side effect of using HTML5 Canvas is also the fact that it's well supported on mobile devices. So just be aware of that when looking at visualizations. Another type of visualization that I've worked on is this one. This is showing you vegetables that are in season, assuming a North American weather pattern, of course. But you can see here we have, in the center here, we have our sort of sections of the year, like our seasons, winter, spring, summer, and autumn, our months, and then surrounding that, the various vegetables that may be in season at that time. So this is sort of a donut chart with some variations on that data, and that can help when looking at you know, when should I plant my garden, or if I'm looking at other types of data that I might be interested in. Another example might be the data that you see typically in a business application. So here's a classic example, the Northwind database that I cited earlier. What we see here on the top is a visualization of a map, and maps are great for displaying data by providing a context through color or otherwise symbols to display that data. And so here you can see I can select various countries if I wanted to see the data for that country. And then as I change that data, we get this sort of nice flow through data binding to update all the rest of the charts and graphs that are on the page. The reason why this is important is because obviously this is the way in which users are going to conceptualize the data that you're showing. You're going to want to provide context. These are little pivots that you can provide in the context of your visualizations for that purpose. And this turns out to be immensely helpful. I mean, like, visualizations are more than just charts and graphs. They include things like availability through calendar requests, the way in which those totals reflect the average or the overall in a lot of different ways. So in this case, you know, you have a lot of different data that which you can disseminate. So that's Northwind, and probably one of the best looking versions of Northwind I've ever seen. So that's definitely something that you can take a look at doing yourself. Another example might include things like visualizations that take the wording, if you will, of the charts and graphs that you're normally used to, and providing more of a pictorial version of that. This is a new feature we've added in Kendo UI, which is called a custom visual template. And the idea here is, rather than actually writing out the name of the country, you can actually either do both. You can actually just write out the name of the country, or you can put the flag here. and provide that sort of representation very succinctly. This is a graph of a score called the happiness index of various countries around the world. You can see Latin America is very well represented at the top. Australia is tied with Canada, which is my home country, so that's great. Another way in which you can represent data is obviously through audio visualizations. So this is an example, this is an experiment that I wrote using Kenda UI that takes audio coming from HTML5 audio and then processing that using Web Audio API to display the various frequencies of the data that's coming in. So this first bar chart that you see here is the frequency data. That's the breakdown of the data that's coming in as an audio stream. And then we have a time domain axis, or if you will, or chart that's showing over that time how that audio is breaking down. You can't hear the audio. I apologize for that. It's the YanCat audio feed, in case you were curious. You can do this for sorting algorithms as well, as I showed you in my slides earlier. There's a lot of different ways to obviously visualize this data, but if you've taken a computer science course, this is a classic one where you've got a bubble sort, very, very slow algorithm. But this is a way in which you can actually visually represent how sorting algorithms would work. And this is done using a sort of standard bar chart, if you will. And the nice thing about this is that you can actually, as a computer science student, for example, through a visualization like this, very carefully inspect how this operates in concert with the various algorithms that you're looking at. So obviously, these are all sort of contrived examples. These are ones that I've actually worked on. But the nice thing about these things is that they actually give you a way of very quickly and easily visualizing these things. Now, the way that this actually operates is pretty simple. We've got a demos page that you can take a look at, which is at demos.telerik.com. There's lots of charts and graphs that you can see there. But underpinning all of these, we've got the source code that utilizes this. For those of you who've used jQuery, which is a very popular JavaScript library on the web, the way that you generate these is through just a series of calls to through jQuery. We load ourselves as a plugin, and then from there, you simply just do configuration via JavaScript. So under every demonstration here, we've got the corresponding HTML5 and JavaScript source code for generating those things. If you have any experience at all with jQuery, you'll notice the syntax here. This is the ability to reference through a selector our target element. The way that we do this is we target an element on the page, like a div tag, and then we call an API that will then take an object literal and then take that as configuration to the API itself. And so we're just taking that data in and then using it to display accordingly. As I said before, we render out as SVG and as canvas. So if you're looking for performance, that's something that you can take advantage of. And we can also access data both from a local perspective, but also from a remote perspective. So if you have data that's hosted at a service endpoint where you're accessing remote APIs, you can go ahead and do that very easily as well. There's a number of ways you can represent this data. You can represent data through a number of axes and start getting very creative with it. It turns out that it's very, very flexible in terms of what you can do. We've recently added some new capabilities to Kenda UI that allows you to add, as I said before, these visual templates. As you can see here, it actually helps to visualize this data, but by providing that symbol, if you will, as opposed to just the standard sort of line chart. So you're combining actually two elements of data here into one, which is great. So another example that I'd like to point to is a customer who's been using Kenda UI. This is a site called Advanced REI, and what these guys do are they're basically they provide a product for people who have real estate, and it allows them to get a sense of their financial data related to that real estate. So these are real estate investors who want to get information about what it is their product, their investment properties are doing for them. I would imagine this would be probably pretty popular in Australia. So the reason why this came about was because there was a lot of open questions from commercial real estate properties as to how is my real estate doing. These guys actually use Kenda UI to visualize that data, and I know that on some levels it's again, it's not that sort of level of TED Talk that you would see where you have people who are using data in very rich and interesting ways. But I found that this was a great example of some of the things that you can see and get a sense of where data actually comes into play. So aside from the aesthetics, which are actually quite nice, there's some other things involved in this that I really, really do like. So the various icons that are used here, the way in which they actually color code and utilize the data very effectively, it turns out to be really, really nice as well. There's a variety of other, I know it's cash flow, it's like ledgers and things like that, but I found it to actually be a very good looking application. And the reason why it's effective is because it will quickly give you a good sense through things like heat maps and otherwise how this thing performs. A really nice perspective here are, on some of the ledgers that are here, have things like leases, other outcomes, expenses, debt, etc., but also perspectives on the property itself. So a really interesting view here is being able to see on a map, for example, how that property is doing relative to its ability to own or rent, or relative to its competitors around here. So as you can see here, we've got a map on the left and then our demographics on the right. And as you update things for things like doing a competitive analysis, this turns out to be immensely powerful. And this is a really good way of visualizing the data. So as you're looking to provide some clarity and insight to your customers or your users when using a framework like Kenda UI, consider that people are going to think about the entities that you're describing in very rich and interesting ways. There's a lot of nuance to data itself, and so you have to be respectful of that when using these visualizations. And this is just a practical example of one visualization that uses that. So Advanced REI uses this, compares it to other customers here, maps those customers on the map here, and allows you to get a good insight into the data itself. So I'll jump back to my presentation. Cool. So as I've shown, there's a lot of different ways in which you can visualize data. It turns out to be immensely powerful, and using a framework like Kenda UI can help you get there very quickly and easily. I would encourage you strongly to utilize these visualizations going forward, and the reason why is because I think that there's a lot of data that's out there, especially within organizations, that is locked up and could be freed of just the sort of standard table ledger that you would be used to, and then provide insights to customers as they're going through this data. Obviously, things like size of web pages and when you should plant your vegetable garden and when you should visualize audio, they're contrived examples, but they're intentionally contrived because they're things that you can relate to. For other information about visualizations, there's a number of websites that you can go check out. Visually is one where you'll see infographics and things of that nature, but you'll get some nice visualizations there. I mentioned TED Talks. You'll see those quite popular. There's other frameworks as well worth checking out, like D3 and Raphael, which are great. These utilize infographics in a very rich way, or rather produce visualizations in a very rich way as well. But just think about those as you're utilizing these frameworks going forward. And as always, make sure that you try and make sure that these things are as beautiful as they can be. So just to summarize here with some resources, and then we have a hard stop, I believe, so I'll make sure to keep this brief. If you want to check out more about Kenda UI, you can go to telerik.com/Kenda UI. As I said, we have our demos page, which is at demos.telerik.com/Kenda UI. And then we have a Twitter account that you can follow, which is @Kenda UI, if you're at all interested. And do feel free to check out our resources there. We've got a lot of great examples. I tend to tinker with this quite a bit, and you can go ahead and check those out on my GitHub if you want as well. So if you need to reach me, that's my email address there, and I'm also on Twitter as well. And with that, I was going to assume that there was time for questions, which is why I skipped through it pretty quick. But if you guys can hear me at all, or I can hear you, I'd be happy to answer any questions if you'd like. Maybe what I'll do is I'll stop sharing for a second, and I'll jump over to group chat here. All right. I can't hear you guys. I'm hoping I didn't drop off.
So he's not going to be able to You need to repeat the question.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question to you.
Okay.
So the question between SVG and HTML5 that you talked about?
Yes. Would you like me to elaborate on that? Okay. So SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. It's a XML fragment that sits within your page. It can live externally to your page in a separate document, and is very good at describing vectors effectively. Vectors are a way of they're a concept in mathematics, which basically says if you've got 1 point here and 1 point here, I don't need to draw every individual pixel in between them. I can just simply say this is XY, this is XY1. And I can, through a mathematical equation, just draw a line through it. The reason why those vectors are effective in computer science and in general computing as well is because they don't require a lot of data to draw. They're very high fidelity because as you scale them, the mathematics scales very well. So SVG has been around since 99, 2000. It's been sort of adopted, but then really ramped up in terms of adoption. Ever since IE9, mobile Safari has obviously there's fallbacks for SVG that you can use as well. So SVG has its place and is used quite extensively in things like icons, and it's used in a number of different areas as well on the web. More often than not, you'll see SVG used where you think it's an image and it's not. So very high fidelity. It's got interaction with the DOM. They can style them with CSS if you want. So it's got some versatility there. Canvas, on the other hand, has a little bit of a wider reach and is a little bit simpler. So let me explain what that is. The HTML5 canvas is sort of akin to Flash, if you will. So it gives you this black box on your page, and it gives you a 2D API. There's about 40, 45 APIs you can target. It's a 2D API, so you'll typically use this for things like games and simple things on the web. It's incredibly fast. And the reason why that is because there's no residual DOM that you're interacting with. There's one element, which is the canvas element, and that just sits on your page, and you just draw everything to that element. It's often hardware accelerated, and it's very, very fast at doing what it needs to. It's not a stateful representation. You have to update the canvas all the time yourself. So that being said, it's a little bit quicker to work with. It's incredibly simple, as I said before, and it's quite versatile because it has wide support on mobile browsers. So mobile Safari, mobile Android, mobile IE, those all support Canvas. And so if you're looking for something that has wide versatility and performance, then HTML5 Canvas is a good solution. However, you can't style it using CSS, and it's a relatively black boxy type solution. It's all JavaScript. There's no markup except for that one element. So those would be the differences. There are other technologies you can use out there, which I didn't mention here, things like WebGL, which is a 3D drawing language, if you will, in JavaScript. There's an API you can target in the browser for that. There's other things like VRML, which is like from way back when, and rastered images as well, obviously. CSS is one that's actually taking off in the Valley quite a bit. So the reason why is because people can generate these beautiful sort of representations using all CSS and animations. So lots of interesting perspective there. But in case of this, for visualizations, I would stick to either SVG or Canvas or both.
Yep.
So sorry, that was a very long answer to a simple question.
Cool. Thank you very much, John. We've got to wrap up. So cheers. You can hear some applause in the background there.
Sorry about the slides.
So thanks for that, John. I'll just show you the crowd that you've had. So thank you very much.
Cheers, mate. Thanks.
See you back in 10 minutes.